If you're like me, you spend lots of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times to hunt will be. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters, and stands at the nexus of machine learning and white-tailed deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've been using the iOS app this season, and it has replaced all my other mapping tools. Visit SpartanForge.ai and sign up today, or head to your iOS or Android app store. Use the promo code TRUTH to save some money and download it today. Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things you can actually buy that will help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This is the reason why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation, instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, Tethered 1 sticks, and the Predator platform, along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. Welcome to the Truth from a Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Spartan Forge. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 325. Today I'm joined by my buddy Chad Sylvester to talk about our lessons learned from this past season in our annual The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly session. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine and getting your postseason stuff kicked off if you haven't already. Mine was delayed one weekend. I'm going to be headed to the North Piece next weekend, finally. Had a bunch of delays, just things kind of popping up here and there. Truthfully, what it has been was that I kind of kept it on the DL. I didn't talk about it a whole lot, but I was doing my first jiu-jitsu tournament. And so I was kind of preparing for that, training, getting extra sessions in. Didn't really cut much weight, but just kind of getting, making sure I was in good shape and stuff like that. And so a lot of my weekends were kind of taken up with being at the gym, getting extra rounds in or extra rolls in to make sure I was ready for the tournament. And so the tournament was this past weekend, and I had 2 matches. I ended up going 1-1. It was kind of, I kind of anticipated that maybe my better match would be in no-gi because it's more familiar with wrestling, and I grew up wrestling. I ended up dropping that match 2-1 and really had a strategy kind of going into it, just like you would for hunting season. It's like for bow season. You come up with a game plan, a strategy during all your preparation, and then you go in, as I did, and sometimes your strategy just is wrong. And I think all you guys out there listening can probably understand that from like a bow hunting perspective. How many times do you postseason scouting, you think, this spot's going to be money or it's going to be great, and then you get into the season and maybe the pressure's a little bit different, or maybe the food sources are changing or a little bit different than you had thought. Very similar to kind of what happened to me this weekend. I kind of had a strategy walking in. The very beginning of the first match, it was clear that my strategy was not going to work. My plan was to kind of start the fight on my feet and kind of do that, since I wrestled, and I typically would have maybe an advantage in jiu-jitsu against guys who haven't wrestled in the past. But it was clear as soon as I tied up with this guy that he had wrestled, and so I was not going to have that advantage on my feet. And so stubbornly, I pressed the action on my feet and should have taken it to the match to the ground and pulled guard, if you will. And so, like, just in, I guess, an analogy to bow hunting, it's like going into the season having a plan and walking in going, hey, there was a bunch of sign here last year, and it was all made in October that I know of, and now it's October and there's no sign here. And then you hunt it anyway. And that was the equivalent of what I did in jiu-jitsu. So I ended up dropping that match 2-1. And then actually had a match against the same guy in gi And so I changed my strategy for that, just like you would, hopefully, if you went out in the timber during, bow season and you see that the sign isn't there that you thought was going to be there. And now you have to kind of maybe do some boots on the ground scouting during the course of the season to try to refine, where the deer are spending time and, where bucks might be spending their fall days or their daylight, the part of their lives where they are moseying around in daylight, or at least killable in daylight. And so I kind of came up with a different strategy for the second match against the same guy, and this one was to pull guard and get the match to the ground as quickly as I could, because I felt like I had an advantage there, and ended up winning that one 11-0. So clearly, first strategy not great. Kept it. It was close. Had a submission locked in at the end. Just didn't have enough time to finish the triangle submission. It'd be the equivalent of seeing your target buck at dark constantly. That was kind of the first match, and then the second one was where everything kind of came into place, and everything that I wanted to do, I was able to do, and I was able to execute, with the exception of a submission at the end. So that was my weekend. That's why I've been a little bit delayed in getting out into the timber and getting stuff done. I've got hopefully one more tournament coming up here this spring. But at this point, I shouldn't be behind the 8 ball for getting stuff done in the timber. Got some stuff done locally, some cameras pulled, a few to kind of grab, and then the North Piece this weekend, which will be a nice kind of relaxing weekend to get away, take the dog, spend a little time in the outdoors, and do some decompressing. But with that, we're going to go ahead and just jump into today's show. Have my good buddy Chad Sylvester on. You know him, you love him. He's from Exodus Outdoor Gear. Just to make mention really quick, they're doing a giveaway worth like $1,800 or something like that. It's like a prime bow and a whole bunch of stuff. I think they're MMT arrows, their new rival cell camera. It's a whole package. So I don't have the link handy. So if you just go to their Instagram, or if you go to their Facebook page, there'll be a link there and a post related to it. So you can click on that and get yourself entered and win a killer package. But aside from that, have Chad on. This is something Chad and I have been doing now for a couple years, where we get together after the season. We usually like to do it a little sooner after the season than this, but just, again, schedules just weren't allowing for it. And kind of do a debrief, if you will, of our past year. We refer to it as the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every season has something that you've done well, some good stuff, some things that maybe were bad, not completely terrible, but just, didn't break your way. And then there's the ugly part, which is like, you just screwed that thing up from, 3 ways from Sunday. And so we go through all those and talk about the lessons learned going into next year, and then what our plans are for next year. This is always a fun episode. It's always kind of how I kickstart my ass in gear to get ready for the next year. And it usually starts to get me hyped for the next fall around this time of year, when he and I kind of have this chat, because I can now see and start to lay the plan for hopefully future success whenever fall rolls around. So with that, we'll go ahead and just jump into today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got on, you know him, you love him. He is a multi-time offender. He is my road dog, Mr. Chad, by God, Sylvester. What's going on, man?
Not too much, buddy. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to chat. It's been a little while since we've done this, I guess, professionally on the show. On either show.
I know. We chat a lot during the hunting season, text often, phone calls. During hunting season, it's probably almost once a week, I would say, checking in. And we did get a hang at Harrisburg, but I always had, I was one day in and out, and then I know we were going to try to record a podcast while we were there, and your gym time got screwed up, and and then the funny thing was, your gym time got screwed up. I had to leave because I had training, jiu-jitsu training that morning, late morning, and I always forget what time it is. And so I left an hour earlier than I needed to. I could have stayed another hour, and I didn't realize it until I was literally almost pulling into my house. I was talking to my wife, and she was like, "Well, you're home early," and I was like, "Yeah, I got jiu-jitsu." She's like, "No, Clint." She's like, "It's an hour later." She's like, "You always do this. You're always an hour too early." So whatever, man. I'm gonna blame it on old age. But how was the show, man? You guys do okay there? Have a good time?
Yeah. The show is always wonderful, man. Harrisburg, the Great American Outdoor Show. It's always fantastic. The people, the attendees that come there to see us and see other vendors too. They're not just there to see us. Don't let me fool you. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces. It's great to meet new people. It's great to kind of stay to the roots of our brand. That's why we're there for Exodus, and kind of give the elevator speech and show that even though that we've grown so much over 8 years, that we're still grounded to the roots, and we still have passion of telling our story and meeting new people and hearing their thoughts and concerns and how their story, hunting stories about how their season went. So it's always a great time to be there. However, it's just like you hear this from anybody that's been to that show for the length or for the entirety. 9 days is a long time, man. Yeah. If we had a clicker with how many times we were shaking people's hands, it's amazing. Like, not everybody comes back to the office sick.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, man, I don't think anyone caught the show crud like that usually happens. Like, right. Cameron showed up sick. Like he's like, screw it. I'm just going to get sick and then show up. I'm going to be patient zero, I think is what his motto was this year.
He was probably hoping I'd give him some time off, but homie don't play that.
Homie don't play that. Suck it up, Buttercup. That's awesome. Yeah, man, I always enjoy enjoy being there, at least for the one day. Would have liked to have been there a second day. There were a couple people that I knew that were coming on Sunday that wasn't able to see. But it is cool being able to just kind of hear everybody's hunting story, what they've had going on. There's a couple people that you see year over, and it's funny because there's a couple dudes that, I actually started a relationship with them just from the show, and I only ever see them there, and we'll talk on social media and stuff like that. And it's just like the one fella, I know he knows you. I don't know how much you may or may not remember. I think his first name is Jay Jackson. If you're listening to this, Jay, and I got your name wrong, I'm sorry. He's from West Virginia. Great hunter. He's a mountain hunter. Cool dude. And it was just nice to get to see him because he posted it on social, so I don't feel bad like talking about it or whatever. But he had some health issues like in the fall. I think it was in the fall and stuff like that. They were pretty significant or pretty serious. And so I only ever see him at the show. And so this is the first time I had a chance to see him since all that happened. And it was just good to like shake his hand and give him a hug. You know what I mean? Be like, hey man, I'm glad you're still here, dude. Like, you know what I mean? Like, glad everything worked out, and he's tackling the mountain, getting after it. And I think I just saw him post something the other day where he was out scouting and getting after it. So man, they make him tough in West Virginia, dude. He's one of them.
That's cool, man. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective too, because it's like a lot of people in the industry have that perspective around the ATA shows. Like, one of the biggest reasons people still go to the ATA show is that like there's so many people and personalities like under one roof that it's almost like a networking event for like industry professionals. But from a consumer standpoint, like a brand standpoint, influencer standpoint, you have that same kind of phenomenon with end users and consumers with the Great American Outdoor Show. I mean, I still believe, I'm not sure if it's still the biggest consumer show in the United States, but it's for sure the largest east of the Mississippi, for sure. Salt Lake might contend with the biggest. I'm not sure, but it's up there either way.
Yeah, I would say, from like just a podcast or influencer or whatever we call this thing anymore, probably more impact at like a show like that. Like ATA always is kind of funny to me, because I don't really understand the point of media being there really. Like, because if the point of like, I mean, I've been there and not as me, I've gone with like a brand or whatever, but, cause if there's no one there to market to, right? Like it's buyers and sellers, right? And so it makes more sense for like the people or partners that brands work with to go to these consumer shows, because these consumers can come see these personalities that they maybe only ever see on YouTube, or they may ever only listen to on podcasts or whatever. And it's their chance to go to a booth and say hi and swap some stories and stuff like that. Like, that doesn't happen at ATA. It's all, like a circle jerk, essentially. Like if I were to classify it, you know what I mean? It's like, we're going to go ahead and talk to each other and, and speak in a little vacuum of our own, or a little echo chamber, I guess, to a degree. I think ATA is cool for like new products coming out. It's like cool to see new stuff. But I just never understood like what the media point was there. But, maybe that's why I don't go anymore. Maybe I'm just not cool enough. But man, I know, so you guys had a cool show. I got to see you guys for a little bit. It's always awesome hanging out with you guys, getting to see Jake, getting to see Cam, getting to see you, especially this year because we didn't hunt together. And I know you guys have, like, so the Rival released right before the show, and I know we were slinging them while we were there. But aside from the Rival, like, what else do you guys have going on? Because you launched the Arrows last year. You have the Rival now. But I think you guys have some other stuff that's coming here in the not so distant future, right?
Yeah, we do. 2022 was a lot of like back end work for us, a lot of infrastructure building out, updated the website, obviously launched that first product in the archery or arrow vertical. And then rolling into 2023, I felt like a lot of people thought we were stagnant, and it was because we had so much shit going on behind the scenes that, in the R&D on both camera vertical and the archery or arrow vertical. And the Rival was the first portion of that being released. So, launched the Exodus Rival AT&T cell camera, in January. In April, we have a second arrow offering coming, which Cameron has been working on and playing and testing with, I want to say since September or August. I mean, he started shooting 204s right when we got done launching the MMTs. Like, he immediately went into 204 stuff and started playing with 204 shafts and doing some different things there. So we've kind of let him kind of take the lead on that. And he's kind of expanded his role here at Exodus. But anyways, we have that 204 offering coming. We have a second camera offering coming later this summer. And then we also have a third arrow offering coming later this summer. So I don't know how much we really, really want to get into that, but that's
right.
Kind of the 30,000 foot view is we do have some more offerings coming in 2023.
Yeah, I figured whenever those all come out, like, we'll definitely do a deep dive on that stuff and get the straight dope from you when that happens. But I just wanted I know you and I've kind of talked about it a little bit. You always kind of give me the drop whenever there's new things kind of happening and so forth. And I was actually talking to Cameron about it at the show because he was asking me, he's like, "Hey, you going to shoot 204s this year?" I was like, "I don't know, man." I was talking to Chad. He's not changing. I was like, he likes what he's shooting now. I was like, I kind of like what I'm shooting now. And then he was telling me about like the quicker recovery and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, you're getting me. I was like, yeah. I'm a sucker for something new and interesting, and then we started talking about 3-fletch versus 4-fletch. And like, I was like, now you're starting to sway me to 4-fletch too. I was like, I've only ever rocked like a 3-fletch ever, but it's just cool that you guys, there's going to be options there. And he had some cool, like, he gave me a few of the deets that we'll get into like down the line whenever lots of stuff comes out. But, just for the people that are listening, like it's cool stuff. Like all the stuff you guys have going on is super cool. And it's always kind of with the hunter, the archer, in mind first and foremost, which is always the most important thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's at the root of our company. Like, everybody that works here, I mean, from the top down, like, everybody is a hunter. And like, we all are consumers, whether we were consumers prior to Exodus, or consumers like working at Exodus, buying other brands, or buying different trail cameras or buying different arrows before we were at Exodus. Like, we all experience different things as consumers, and like, we all have different things that kind of float our boat, I guess, tickle our fancy, whatever you want to call it. There's things that we look for individually, and when we kind of collectively look at those things, it's like, okay, how many of these problems can we address or solve, or what do we like, what do we dislike, and like, how can Exodus as a brand like bring that to the marketplace to help other people? And that's basically how we look at those things.
Right. I know someone asked me this question at the show. They said, we were standing over by the arrows, and first we were talking about the new camera, and then they were like, "Hey, how about these arrows?" I was like, I shot them all year. I was like, they shoot great, killed a deer with them. They're awesome. I was like, I like them. He's like, well, why did they start making arrows? And I was like, here, let me give you, like, I could tell he wasn't in for it for the long story. You know what I mean? So, so I was like, I'll make it short and sweet for homeboy here, so he gets it. I was like, Chad was having a hard time getting some arrows to tune with a bow. I was like, you may not know Chad. I was like, but I know him pretty well. I was like, when something can't get fixed, it's like he goes down the rabbit hole of like, well, why won't it get fixed? And then he unearths all the problems, and then he gets pissed off and says, I can do this better. I'm just going to make my own shit because it'll be better. And then that's what he does. I was like, it's exactly how he started the camera company. I was like, he didn't like what was available. He got pissed. He went down the rabbit hole. He's like, screw it. I'll make my own. I was like, and so I was like, and I just kind of said, I was like, that's the cool thing about, what you guys do is that it's born from that kind of hacker roots of like, we're going to hack the problem and then we're going to solve it. And if I have a better solution, then we'll do it. If I don't have a better solution, then we're not going to play with it, So he was like, and he just kind of looked at me. He's like, He's like, that's interesting. I was like, I don't think he knew that that's how the company started, like just at the get go. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but cool, man. Well, let's jump into some hunting stuff, dude. Because last year we didn't get to hunt together last year, and you and I always do at the end of the year at some point. You know, whether it's right after the hunting season or like we are now, just like a couple months later, we usually do a good, the bad, and the ugly. It's a very Clint Eastwood title. And it's kind of like a post-mortem of the past season. Like, gives us a chance to, like, it's like when you have a bad football game, and your coach is like, hey, we got blown out by 40. We're going to bury that football, bury that tape, never look at it. We're just going to move on, right? It's like you talk about it for a minute and then you just, like, move on. That's kind of what this episode is that, you and I just kind of talk about all the stuff that happened, and then we move on and start our preparation. It allows us to heal finally, right? From the last
100%.
season. So let's start with the good, right? I always like to end with the bad. We'll end on the sour note. So we'll start with the good, man. So what was for your season? What was the good part of your season? Like, if you had to classify, think about all the stuff, because you and I didn't even talk about your elk hunt yet. Like, you've not been on since that.
No. Well, the elk hunt was certainly good. And good from a lot of different, basically every perspective you can have on a hunt, it all was good. Every part of it. Obviously filled a tag with my first bull, so that was the goal accomplished. Incredible hunt. The experience there, not necessarily in the backcountry, but I guess some of it was backcountry, like 2 or 3 day backcountry trips. I guess you kind of got that feel of that backcountry experience, so that portion of it was good. But also just learning about those animals and learning how to hunt them and learning like that you don't. This is like for any elk hunter out there. Like as we consume content, we try to have like these shoebox, one size fits all. Like mentality of like how that hunt needs to go. And a lot of it when you're consuming content in the Western world is like, okay, you need to go into their bedroom and you need to learn how to call, and you need to call a screaming bull in at 15 yards and send an arrow through them. And that's like what everybody wants to experience. Right. And I'll be the first one to tell you as a novice, as someone who doesn't understand all the different vocalizations, that is very difficult to do. When you get into close quarters inside their bedroom, you're not trying to be one nose and one set of eyes. There's 30 sets of eyes there and 30 noses. And that was one of the biggest things that I learned when you sneak into these bedding areas. There's different ways, different approaches, different tactics there, which that stuff's easy to figure out. But the time frame that you have to make something work when you're trying to beat 30 eyes and 30 sets of eyes and 30 different noses is very, very small. And if you can't make it happen, the gig's going to be up before long. So that was one of the things I've learned relatively quick on that hunt was like, okay, I'm not good enough to kill a bull in that manner in his bedroom. I'm just not. Mm-hmm. Right. And the thing that I can do is like, listen, I'm in good shape. I got good legs and I can walk a hell of a long ways. Right. So let me just locate these bulls in transition from feed going back to bed and like, let me just stalk them. And that kind of happened by accident. I had located a bigger bull. This is like the story of my life here. I located a big bull and I'm going to go kill him. He's the biggest one I found in 3 or 4 days, and bigger than what was normal for that area. I think most of the bulls that we were seeing were like the 250 to 280 range, which to me is like an awesome bull, like Pope and Young, maybe just below Pope and Young. But there was a bull that we had spotted with 6 or 7 cows that was easily well over 300, like 315, 320. I'm like, all right, I'm going after him. And boogered him up a couple times. But one morning hiking in, we caught a different herd. We got to this ridge top just as the sun was coming up. And I was trying to make my way back into that bedding area and basically just cut him off before he came back to bed and just wait for that whole herd to come back up into that drainage. And we caught a herd in transition with one bull that was, again, indicative of the size of elk that we were seeing there, a 250, 260-inch bull. And I thought, here's the bull right in front of me. Let's just try to do something with him. Like, don't leave elk to go find elk. You know what I mean? So that stock in transition back into their bedding area led me to a 10-yard opportunity that I screwed up. Took one too many steps, was at full draw on him, and I got busted. So, and the way he took off, there was no shot. He kind of ran straight away from me a little bit. So there was no shot there. But the lesson that I learned is, like, maybe I don't have to do this like everyone is telling me I have to do this. Like, everyone says you have to locate them, let them go back to bed, and then go in and kill them. Like, I'm not good enough to do that. And maybe, like, if you're Paul Mendel or, Corey or any of those guys, you can do that. I'm not those guys. So ultimately, changing strategies, just going back, knowing where they were feeding. So number one, locate where they were feeding so you can do that at night. So locate those animals and then just get them in transition to where I could make a move and basically cut them off. Now, it didn't exactly play out like that, but what happened the day that I killed it was day 9 of the hunt. And I had blown, 3 or 4 different opportunities up until that point. And when I woke up that morning, I just thought, you know what? I don't care what happens today. I'm killing it. I don't care if it's a spike. I don't care if it's a 400-inch bull. Like, I'm killing something. Like, I just woke up with that mentality, right? It was rainy, kind of crappy weather. The guy that I was with, John, didn't want to hunt that morning because we were hunting in teams. He was hunting with me. He had a different tag. But anyways, we woke up that morning, didn't want to hunt. It was raining. So I rode a dirt bike about 10 miles from camp to a trailhead, hiked in 3 miles to get up on top of this ridge that was like basically backdoored some private. And these elk, and I say elk, there were anywhere from 30 to 50 elk down in these alfalfa fields feeding. And they would work back up this ridge and go, 3 to 10 miles back up into the mountains. So I just got up on a ridgetop and just listened and watched. And the long and short of it is I ended up following a herd 5.5 miles back to their bedding area and killed them right as those bulls bedded down. Snuck back up in there, and there was a couple opportunities I had kind of along the way, but there was some really crappy weather. I mean, there was hail, lightning storm rolled in. There was fog so thick, like I couldn't see 50 yards in front of me. At one point, I was sprinting to catch up with them because these bulls were bugling, and I knew if I didn't have an audible, like I wasn't going to have a visual because I'm going up and down mountains. If they're on a different ridge side, like I can lose them pretty fast. So like I can't afford to lose distance, and they go a hell of a lot faster than a human can. Going up and down these ridges. So at times, like I was sprinting. I got to a spot where I had to cross a creek that was thigh deep, and I, instead of taking my clothes off and wading through it, I was like, the hell with it. Like I'm committed. Like I'm going after it. Right. So I run across the creek, lightning, hail start happening, and the weather breaks, and I have like 40 minutes. What I thought was like 40 minutes to get dried out. So I stripped down to my underwear. I'm naked on the side of the mountainside with all my clothes hanging in sage, trying to get this stuff dried out because I'm like hiking with wet socks and wet boots when you're putting on that many miles is the recipe for freaking disaster. And plus I'm thinking, forward thinking about a pack out with wet boots and wet socks and like, that ain't going to be good. So at one point I'm down in my underwear. I start to lose distance. These elk start moving again. They're bugling. So I get dressed. Anyways, I follow them back into their bedding area, and I watch the herd bull lay down. I'm like 100 yards from the herd bull. Don't have an arrow nocked yet. I'm just sitting just outside of the timber, kind of on top of the ridge where timber meets the sage. And I watch this bull lay down, and there's 3 or 4 bulls in there bugling, and there's cows in there. You can hear some cows mewing and stuff. And I thought, that bull laid down. He's 125 yards away from me. I'm like, it's a done deal, man. This thing's dead. So I knock an arrow, drop my pack, knock an arrow, and I just thought, I'm just going to slide down here in my butt, just go real slow. Like I got all day. I can go as slow as I want. And when I get to 75 yards, I'm shooting him in his bed. And so I do that, I start creeping in there. I'm sliding to my butt, and I go maybe 15, 20 yards over like 25 minutes. Like I'm going as slow, like painstakingly slow, because I'd already screwed up 3 or 4 times. Well, I'll say 2 or 3 times in bedding areas like this. But right. as that front rolled through It got sunny. The thermals were sucking up. Like everything was like, it was like the magic happened. Like it was my time. And as I'm sneaking down in on this bull, I hear a stick break off to my left. Not like a stick like a whitetail, like a snap like of a log, basically, like something big's
Right.
here. And I'm thinking, man, one of these cows are going to come over here and bust me, and they're like, the gig's going to be up. I'm like, this is like, this can't happen. And as I look over, and I'm kind of stuck out in the open a little bit. I mean, I had a little bit of cover there. I had like 2 trees in front of me, but like not where an animal could walk within 10 yards of you and not see you, you know? So as I hear the stick break, I kind of turn my head slow, and here comes this little 4x4, just like lollygagging, like, oh, I'm a dumb 2-year-old, 3-year-old elk. What's going on over here, you know? And I'm like, God damn it. Like, this is not what I'm here for. But I said this morning I was going to kill something. I'm like, do I kill this thing? Because he's like 25 yards away from me, you know? And he's on his trajectory is going to take him 5 yards in front of me. And I'm like, do I kill this thing, or do I just let him walk past me? And I'm like, oh. And then I look over and I see this bigger bull laying down. I could see his antlers kind of through the pine trees. And I thought, man, I didn't come up here to kill this thing. And then I thought, dude, you woke up this morning and said, like, it didn't matter what you killed today, you were just going to kill. I said, you know what? That's right. And I swung my bow over and just let one fly and just blasted him. Ended up shooting him at like, I don't know, 10 or 12 yards. Like, it was super, super close. Right. Thing went like 70 yards piled up. It was crazy, man. It was an awesome hunt. The pack out, I had a radio with me. I think I called you, actually. Didn't I call you?
You did. Yeah, you called me from the mountain. I remember, like, all I remember is, like, I got on the phone with you and I was like, I didn't know what was happening because you were like,
I was jacked.
Oh yeah, you were like, blah! And I'm like, what is happening? You're like, all I could get out was like, I was naked. I didn't have any clothes on. I stalked this elk 9 miles. Like, and I was like, all right, you everything all good? You're like, yeah, everything's good. And I'm like, okay. Like, at first you were like hyperventilating, and I was like, is homeboy like in trouble? Like, what's going on?
Well, the whole time it was like, because everyone says you can't kill elk like that. Like, you can't cover ground. You can't do that. You have to kill them in their bed. And like, it was like that during that whole hunt. I was like, I'm going to show them that you can. And I'm not saying that you like, again, I'm a freaking rookie elk hunter. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was whatever. But that whole hunt started with mentality of, number one, I'm going to kill that day. Like, I woke up that morning saying I was going to kill. And then through that whole hunt, you know, hiking in 3 miles, not a big deal, right? But then to cover 5.5 or 6 miles, like with those elk in transition, like, was not an easy thing to do. When I say I was running at some points, I was sprinting, like, oh, wow. And that's covering elevation. Like, it was no joke. But anyways, I get to that point. I call my wife, and I think I called John's guy I was hunting with. And I'm like, yo, you're not gonna like this, but I'm like 9 miles from a trailhead, and we got to pack this thing out. And it's hailing. Like, it wasn't good. But the cool thing about this, one of the coolest thing about this hunt was, so we quartered this thing up, and John the whole time is like, let's just get the meat hung. We'll do this in a couple trips. And I'm like, no, man. I'm like, we've been here 9 days. You have a tag that we haven't hunted on yet. We're getting this thing out in one trip. And he's like, it's 9 miles. He's like, we're not going to pack this thing out. He's like, he's 150 pounds soaking wet, right? And I'm like, John, don't worry about it. You just carry what you can, and I'll take the rest. It doesn't matter. He's like, we won't be able to do it. It's going to take us forever. I'm like, we'll go a mile at a time. We'll break it up. We'll take eight breaks. You know, it won't be bad. And like, we don't have to run. We don't have to go at a certain pace. Like, you're going to beat me. I'll get there eventually. Like, let's just get it done. He's like, you sure? I'm like, yeah. So he takes a hind quarter, and I got basically everything else, which was idiotic, stupid. It was very painful. But the cool thing is, we only made it 1.25 miles, and we ran into some cowpokes, right? There's 3 cowpokes back in the mountains pushing cattle. And we stop and talk to them, and I gave them, I think, $100 or $150 or something like that. And they took all the meat bags and our packs and took everything to the road. And all we had to do was get out to the dirt bikes and basically circle around and pick this drive and get the stuff on the road. It was like, I don't know how much more you can ask for, but that was like the luckiest moment of my life.
Yeah. How thankful were you for those Cowboys, dude? Like,
dude. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that's one thing. Regardless of your mentality of how tough you think you are, like packing that amount of weight for that length, like it. Oh man, I would have been useless that for at least 24 hours after that. I mean, it was rough.
Yeah. I mean, the Western Mountains, even without weight, they're unrelenting. It's like they're brutal. There's no way around it. And then just the distance too that you were having to cover. That alone is a lot in that country. Notwithstanding that you've got however much meat, antlers, head, hide, whatever else you have going on. So my favorite part of that whole story is the fact that you were like in your underwear stalking these elk. That's like my favorite part of the story. Like, and that's like in my mind, it will always be that. It will always be that you killed this. I don't care if you were fully clothed when you killed this elk or not. Like in my mind, and anytime I tell this story, it will be that you killed this elk in your underwear. So just so you know. But so that was obviously that's good, right? Like killer hunt, killer experience. I was super stoked for you, just because I know how much you like elk hunting, and how much you were really hoping to get it done this year. And so I was super stoked when I got that phone call. A little worried at first when you called. Then after I figured out what happened or learned, understood what happened, like then I went from like worried to stoked. But shifting gears to whitetails, what was your good for whitetails this year?
Well, the good was I got to go to Iowa. That was the good. So that's another highly anticipated tag. That hunt didn't work out quite like I wanted it to. I had access to some private, which obviously makes things a little easier. There's no doubt about it. Outside of that, man, there wasn't too much good. I found a deer. I mean, it took me a couple of days to find a deer to hunt, which was good. But I think that was the third or fourth day, before I laid eyes on that deer. And then I hunted him for a couple of days after that. Then we kind of lost visual, but I couldn't close the deal on him. And I say a deer, it was, I don't know, 180 inch, like mainframe 10-pointer, a big frame deer. It could have been bigger than that. Saw him right before a front one night, out in like the edge of the CRP and / bean field. And basically hunted him on the ground for a couple of days, consecutive days there, and never could get close enough or have him within shooting hours to get a shot at him. Had him at 100 yards, had him at 75 yards, consecutive nights, and could never close the deal.
Yeah, I know you sent me video that you were able to take with your cell phone, and that thing was a hammer. I didn't realize he was a mainframe 10, man. If he was that big as a mainframe 10, dude, that is stupid.
Yeah, he's a big deer. Yeah. Probably the biggest.
Go ahead.
Probably the biggest frame deer that I've ever seen on the hoof.
Damn. Yeah, because you had that encounter with that, one that was pushing two bills.
Right.
So. Yeah, man. I think for me, the good for me was probably, at least in Pennsylvania was. It was a rough year. Like I just didn't have much on camera. I think I texted you the day after I was pulling cameras. I finally had the first deer. I don't even know if I texted you this or not, but I pulled cameras this past weekend, and I finally had the first deer that was like Pope and young, other than the one that I had the encounter with. So I just haven't had a whole lot around here. So the good locally was that the one deer that I knew of, and I only ever got one picture of this deer, and that was, I think it was September 27th. And I waited till my prime date of October 18th and slipped into this like community scrape area. And sure enough, he showed up. Same date the year prior, so date's holding true in that area. And he showed up around, I want to say like around 10 o'clock if memory serves. And, I watched him bedded for 2 hours, and he just got up and walked out of my life. Like he was laying downwind of the scrape so he could scent check it. He never had to move to check it or anything. And so that was really the kind of the good from from Pennsylvania locally because it was the only deer that I had inventory of that I knew of that I was willing to shoot. And I was able to kind of get within 40 yards of him, bedded, and just couldn't make it happen, So, can't kind of dial it in any better than that, I guess, without getting an arrow off. For the north piece, I hunted it, I think 3 days this year, 3 or 4 days. And there was only one day while I was there that I didn't see deer. And so for me, this was the second year on that piece. And the goal really this year was like, to get up and hunt for a couple of days, continue to scout. But this year was, can I get, into deer this year? Like I've spent a year scouting it. I've hung cameras. In year 2, can I just put myself around deer? And so I did that on every hunt but one. In 2 of the hunts, 3 of the hunts, I think actually I saw a buck. 2 or 3, I can't remember exactly. So that was good. So for me, that was good because that was like inching closer, so hopefully this upcoming year, the 3rd year, is the year that, maybe a tag gets filled, in that area. And I had really good deer on camera and stuff like that. And there was another spot that had some megas that I really wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to. So that one's like more on the radar now for this off season for scouting and camera surveillance and stuff like that. So all good things there in the north piece. Kansas was good. It's also kind of part of the bad and the ugly. But the good part with the Kansas hunt was, immediately was in deer. I was finding shooter bucks. I was seeing a lot of deer. I was seeing a lot of bucks. Just wasn't able to seal the deal. And I saw probably the biggest. He was probably pretty close to that one that we had on camera out there right when we got out to Kansas last year. And we thought he was probably like 160-ish or whatever. This deer was probably like right around that. He was in like 50 to 60-ish range. When I finally got a good visual of him on the last day, like he seemed more 60-like than 50-like. Just tons of mass, big frame, kickers. Like when I finally got to see like the character of his rack, like he was a big deer, and I knew that from like the first day that I saw him. I think it was on day 2. But once I got that real close visual of him on the last day, it was like, I realized then how big he was just because I was able to see like all the, characteristics that his rack had, stuff like that. So that was good, had close encounters on the ground, man. So it's like the ground game, it's like I'm getting better at, which is something I've wanted to evolve like the past couple years. And I'm getting close. I'm getting within bow range. I'm getting within, 15 to 25 yards, sometimes closer. Well, I had some really close encounters with some bucks that was like 5 yards or whatever, but they just weren't the deer that I wanted to kill. The ones that I was willing to kill, 2 of them in particular, I was within, the one like 15 to 18 yards, and the other one was like right around 20 yards. So it's like I'm getting, and both of them were, I wasn't in a tree, I was on the ground, there wasn't really a whole lot around me, it was in CRP, so it wasn't like I was like stuck in a blind somewhere or like a brushed in area or whatever. I was having to play like the, can you pull this off in the middle of nothing game, And so that was the good. And then the last good for me was just, Idaho was tough, and it's part of the bad and the ugly as well. But it was just good to go out west and see different country because it just gives you a different perspective, a deeper appreciation for like how rugged some of that stuff hunts out there and in the area that I was in. Got to go out and hang out with my buddy Wilson. I mean, part of the, not to get there too early, but like part of like the ugly was just, I was in elk most every day, and really probably within bow range for the most part. Like when I say bow range, like somewhere between like 40, 50 yards, like roughly. But that area is just so thick, like 40, 50 yards, you can't even see them. It's like, it's like hunting in a clear cut that's like 7 years old. You know what I mean? Like, it's like what it's like, because like you just can't see very far in front of you unless they're going to come down this little runway or this little trail or this, drainage or something like that. Like, you're just not going to see them, And so that was tough, but like it was good because we were playing the game. Like, we didn't really get winded. We had, second day, we had a really close encounter where we had elk literally on the other side of a cedar tree of me. Like, if I had arms as long as yours, I might have been able to reach out and grab it. Like, you know what I mean? Like it was that close, it's like you can hear it breathing, and you're just like, oh my God, they're going to see us. They're going to see us. You're sitting there, you're trying not to blink, you're like, you're thinking like, if I blink, they're going to see me. But But yeah, that I think was the good for me for this season. Just like all the different hunts, like no tag was filled, a lot of close encounters, a lot of places that probably should have happened, and we'll get into those. But for whatever reason, they just didn't come to fruition. But I'm just curious, man, for you, what would you take from like your good experiences this year, that things that you did right or things that you did well, or maybe it's something that you learned or whatever that you can take and apply for next year? Like, what is that thing, like when you think back on all your good experiences and say, hey, this really worked well for me, or I did this really well this year, like this is something I think that I can use going forward?
I think this is for me. This has happened a couple of times the last 2 years, right? And this probably goes back to our first Kansas trip. But I think not having I think it's okay to have expectations for a hunt and goals for a hunt like that. I think that's something that everyone should do, and that's different for everybody. That could be filling a tag, not filling a tag, the experience, inches of antler, whatever it is. It's different, right? But having expectations on how to accomplish those objectives or accomplish those goals, I think hinders us as hunters, at least hinders me sometimes. And I think like understanding and realizing that early on after a couple mishaps in Idaho, and then thinking, okay, well, I'm not someone else. Like, I'm not Jason Phelps. I'm not, I'm not Corey. I'm not, I can't vocalize like these guys can. I can't understand what the elk are telling me like Paul can. Let me use my abilities, let me use my top end abilities, which is physicality basically, because I'm dumb as a rock. Let me use my physicality and, to accomplish my objective. So I think for me I think that I learned some of that in the first trip we went to Idaho or to Kansas when I killed that deer on the ground, which I did not want to do. Like, if you replay that story, like I spent half the day trying to find a freaking tree to get in, and there was no tree. So sometimes I think, for me, I think about different ways I want to accomplish something, and then I just try to beat my head against the wall to do it that way. And I think, that trip to Idaho this year kind of opened my eyes and really confirmed that, you don't always have to have a dedicated route to get to the finish line. Like, to have an open mind, or maybe have 3 or 4 different pathways to get to the finish line. And sometimes you might not have that path. It might just happen naturally. But I think you need to just be able to, what that taught me was having the perspective and the ability to think through different situations to make kind of outside the box decisions to get to the end goal, or to get to the finish line. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I had this year.
Yeah, I think that's sage advice, man, just for anyone in general. I think oftentimes we'll get stuck in a rut of trying to achieve, especially in hunting. Like, there's so much hunting media out there, whether whomever it is, right? Where you look at their style. Like, Dan's a great example. And Dan's helped more people kill deer than arguably anybody. But he'd be the first one to tell you, like, stuff that I do works, but like, man, you should figure out what works for you and do that. You know what I mean? Like, there's some principles you should use that I think are pretty sound, but otherwise, like, whatever works for you, that's the stuff you should double down on. And it's interesting because, like, it gets beat into my head, that particular kind of, like, fundamental understanding of how to, like, get good at something in doing jiu-jitsu. Because, look, I'm 44. I'm rolling with a lot of guys that are, like, in their 20s. Like, I can't out-athlete them like I could whenever I was younger, where I was a good athlete. I can't out-strength them. They're just physically stronger than me. You know what I mean? And so I have to come at it from, like, a very different approach. I have to use the tool and the skill that is good for me, which a lot of times for me is like playing almost like a slippery game, where it's like I let them kind of get to a spot because I ultimately want to get them. I want them to be there because it's the one way I know that I can get out of danger or whatever. And so when they think that I'm in a bad spot, it's actually the spot that I want to be in. And so it's kind of learning to, just use what you're really, really good at. Like, I'm pretty flexible, and so I use that. You know what I mean? Like, and they're more explosive than me, but I can be good once as I ever was. You know what I mean? So it's like when I need to hit it once real hard, it's like I only got that one because I don't have the recovery those dudes do, but I'll wait and be patient to let them get to a spot to where I can have an opportunity to be successful, right? And I think for me that was the biggest kind of learning thing for me from the good stuff, was that what I thought I did well this year was being patiently aggressive. Like, I was going after things when I knew that the moments were right, but I wasn't pressing the issue, and I felt like I was making the right decisions at the right times. Like, and it wasn't like I was making them too soon. I wasn't making them too late. I felt like I was doing all this kind of at the right moment, and should have released a couple arrows. Just didn't happen. The Kansas one in particular, like, I was having to be. The ground game is just like, what I'm learning is like, yes, it's aggressive, but there is so much patience that has to be built into that, or else you screw yourself way before. That's right. I saw that big deer on day 2. I could have ran through that CRP and tried to cut him off and try to get to a spot, but I knew. I was like, that is such a bad idea. You and I almost tried that like the year before, you know what I mean? Like, and got too aggressive. And I was like, and it comes with a little bit, of experience from having been out there for 1 year. And I was like, look, he's at the front end of probably getting ready to breed this doe. He's probably going to quarter for like another day, maybe 2. He's going to lock down with her for 3 days. So it puts us at 5 days. So I'm not going to see him again once he disappears into that backside into that CRP. I'm probably not going to see him again until Friday. And I just knew that. And I was like, all right, so we're going to keep an eye on this and be patient. If he shows up, we'll make a play. But otherwise, I'm going to spend some time in some other areas and see if I can't turn something else up. And then on day 5, I came back, and that's when I saw him. And that's when I had the last encounter with him. Didn't see him again until that, And so it was that, like, understanding how to be patient and then be aggressive at the same time. I think that was the thing that I did well this year that I'll take with me, in future seasons.
That's a hard thing to learn too, man. I don't know that you can learn that without being in those circumstances and either making the wrong decision or making the right decision. And I don't think you can fully learn it until you actually do make the wrong decisions.
Yeah, 100%. And the other part was too is that, because you and I were out there together the year before, I had a pretty good idea what the deer were doing in that general area, in that particular piece. And so I had that in my Rolodex too, where I was like, all right, well, this is what we saw last year. This is what Chad was seeing when he was glassing. So I'm assuming this is what's going to play out here. And so let me go ahead and try to divide my time up and spend some time in other places and not put all my eggs in one basket. Because I really think I'm going to see that deer again, but it's probably not going to be for a couple of days, And it's also like watching like whitetail adrenaline guys. Like, it's the same thing. Like, they'll have that happen where they'll be like, all right, that deer's probably gone for like a couple of days. We'll come back and we'll see if we can't find him in a couple of days, And it's scary when you have only so many days to do, because you're like, I might just be screwing myself and not see him ever again, or another deer. You know what I mean? But it ended up working out. So, all right, we're going to move on from the good, dude. We're going to move on to the bad. So what was the bad for you this year?
The bad for me was just not prioritizing time. And when I say prioritizing time, I got to be careful in how I talk about this, because I have more time to hunt now than what most people have in a fall. Like, right, most guys have a week maybe. I spent almost 3 weeks in Idaho. But looking at that, knowing how important that Iowa tag was to me, not prioritizing enough time to make a follow-up trip, I think is something that I regret, and I probably will regret until I go back to Iowa and fill that Iowa tag.
Right.
Yeah, that would be it.
Yeah, the time got away from you a little bit, but I mean, but not to go back to the good or the positive, but you got some, even on like the public that was around there, not even like the private that you were able to hunt like that, not even withstanding, like you got some good learnings from the public that was around there, just from the scouting you were able to do, running some cameras out there. Cameron was able to go out and hunt that general area as well. And I think what you learned was it's an area in Iowa. Look, Iowa's good in general, right? There's some zones that are primo, but I think what you also learned was like there's maybe a zone that isn't as high on people's priority list that you can maybe go see more often, if you will, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, listen, Iowa, for guys coming from Pennsylvania and Michigan, New York, and even Ohio or Indiana and Illinois, Iowa is it's a different world. And you've talked about it with your Iowa hunt, like deer doing deer stuff. I stopped counting bucks on the second or third day. Like I can't tell you how many deer I saw. I stopped counting because it got to one point where I'm sitting in the stand and, I was out there to shoot us after a certain caliber of deer. And after that big deer kind of disappeared, I was so used to pulling my phone out and just like filming stuff walk past me. I pulled my phone out on this, what I thought was like a mid 130s deer. And he's like, I'm looking through my phone at this deer as he gets closer and closer and closer. And I'm like, oh shit, like that deer's bigger than 130. I got to put my phone down. And it was probably a deer pushing in the 50s. I think he was only a 3-year-old and I wouldn't have shot him anyways. But to that point, like I got so in the habit of just pulling my phone out and filming these deer, like I wasn't conscious that deer could have been 160 inches and I would have screwed everything all up. But to that point, I was just a different place. And I did the work on the front end to do postseason scouting, to run cameras all summer. Like we had made multiple trips out there to run cameras, to lay some leather on some pieces of public and to look at some private and do all this stuff prior to the hunt. Not to set enough time aside because that tag only comes every once, a handful every year, or once a handful every years. Not to go back and, have enough time to fill a tag was probably a mistake, but
right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I don't think I've ever asked you this, but I know you had a buddy who had that private piece that said, hey, you should come out and just, hunt the farm. But is there any part of you that regrets hunting that farm and chasing that big deer rather than hunting on the public? Because you likely would have seen a decent caliber of buck on that public and likely would have just filled your tag because you wouldn't have been chasing that 180, 190. You would have been like, look, the first 140-inch deer I see on public land is going to get it.
Yeah. But that regret doesn't come from chasing that caliber of deer. The regret doesn't come from that. The regret comes from, I don't know. There's a different, when you're on someone else's piece of private, you can't just buzz cut through it and like blow everything out of there. I mean, it was relatively a smaller piece. The farm that big deer was on was maybe 150 acres, something like that. Mostly CRP and ag. So not like, they were fence lines basically and deer was living in the CRP. So it wasn't like there was a ton of cover and there was a lot of pressure from the neighboring properties. So like I could have buzz cut through that and maybe bumped a deer and maybe he would have went somewhere else. And I was there right before the shotgun season. So maybe he would have went and lived on neighbors and shotgun hunter would have killed him. I don't know. But that part of being semi-handcuffed, not being able to just go do what you want because you're on somebody else's piece of dirt. And ultimately, like, he's a hunter too. So like, and he's trying to protect not just that deer, but basically all the deer because he's hunting a certain type of age class too. That was a little bit different. And he gave me enough, Austin gave me enough, had enough trust in me, like where he let me go hunt that deer in the ground, which I don't know that he would have let anyone like off the street or anyone else go do that. He said, like, if you think you can get in there on them without screwing stuff up, like, go do it. And I took precautions to do that. But I think if that was on a piece of public, the approach would have been a lot more aggressive, I think. I'm not saying it would have been right or wrong, but that's the one thing I do regret. I think being on that piece of private, it felt like I didn't have full control of what I really wanted to do.
Right. How would you have changed your approach if it was on public?
I would just, crawled right in there with them, crawling and brawling. And you screw it up. Then you go find another one. Because you're like on that scenario on the private, like you are playing a long game because you do like for me to bump that deer, bump a deer like that living on someone else's farm and then being killed by the neighbors, I would have felt like a total asshole. Like I would have felt like a pile of dirt. Where on public, like, it is what it is. Like you bump them, you screw it up, you go find another one. So it's hard because maybe you go on public and you don't get an opportunity at a deer of that caliber. And sure, they're out there. Like one of my buddies killed a mid 170s while he was out there on public. So they are for sure out there. But I think, as far as regrets, like I don't regret finding a deer of that caliber. It's just like being handcuffed a little bit on how you can maneuver on them, I guess.
Right. Which is a lot of times why we prefer to hunt public, even in the good states, even if you have access, because you get that freedom to move, right? It's like, you might have played it a little bit more aggressively, trying to get in there, like you said, like, get into bed with him and see what happens, and not worry about blowing him out or maybe even chasing him down again later, because you're handcuffed by the property lines too. So even if he didn't go far, it's not like you could go across the property line and chase him. You know what I mean? It's like, because a big deer like that, I have a feeling, as old as he was, he probably, even if you bumped him, he probably wasn't going to go far, but he might have just went far enough to where you didn't have a play anymore,
That's right.
Yeah. So I think my bad, man, thinking about this, I think for me, locally in PA, like the part that was the hardest locally was just like not finding really a deer to chase for the most part, other than that one that I knew about early and had to play on him, and had the encounter. And I think what I needed to do better this year, I really relied on my postseason scouting from years past, and I really understood where my white oaks, red oaks, where there was, any greenbrier browse and stuff like that. Greenbrier browse being like the lowest common denominator or the lowest factor in the whole thing, during the fall. And I had some like primo scrape areas that had just killer acorn crops around them. And I knew where all of them were, and I had a really, really bad acorn crop this year to where they pretty much were nil. And so a lot of those scrapes I was finding were adjacent to doe bedding. Well, why were the does bedding there? They had a killer acorn crop, right? And so then whenever I went back to scout it to see if I was going to hunt it, it's like either the scrape was still there, but it just wasn't nearly as active as it was previously, and the acorns definitely weren't there. And so the thing I need to do better this year, or that was bad this past year, was like I just didn't have a good enough handle on like the rotation of, I don't want to say rotation, but just like I didn't have a good enough beat on the changing food sources, essentially. Right. Mm-hmm. I was relying on those acorns, and I was really relying on them so much to the point that because I had so many spots like that, I was like, man, there's got to be like a handful of them that produce, and I'll just go to whatever one that's producing. And it's like, I mean, I literally, most of like, cause I opened in September. So most of my September hunts weren't even really hunts. They were more scouts, like to all the different spots that I had like earmarked and checking the food in all those places. And by the time like the first week of October rolled around, I'm going like, man, I don't have a single spot with like shit for food. You know what I mean? And so then it really kind of threw me for a loop at that point. I was really, just being honest, like I was a little bit disheveled. I didn't have a great game plan at that point. And so I think what I need to do this off season, I need to branch out into some of these areas that are kind of surrounding the spots that I've marked, and go in and start to try to find like the secondary food sources that they're using whenever the acorns aren't popping. And that, I think, is what my plan needs to be locally. For the north piece, the bad was I just, to your point, like similar to you, I just didn't have the time. I didn't prioritize getting up to that piece, so I only was able to hunt it for a couple days. And there's really, really good deer up there. And part of it was just me, waiting for the perfect weather, right? And going like, oh, it's going to be too warm, so I'm not going to go, and I'll just hunt around home or whatever. And that honestly was a lot of the reason why I didn't get up as often as I could have, or I should have. And what I need to do now is just like, when the weather's not right, like you go anyway and you just adjust, right? Like, and that's just all there is to it. Cause I missed out on probably an extra like 4, maybe 5 days of hunting up there because I just wasn't going to go because the weather or the wind wasn't working for where I wanted to go, where I should have just went anyway and went wherever the wind was going to allow me to go. Cause that piece I really just need experience and time on. And that's only going to come by going up there, hunting it and figuring it out. And to your point, having some bad hunts on it, blowing stuff out, having bad access, whatever. I was trying to protect some of those areas because there's a couple really good deer that are there that I didn't want to. I knew were like in a couple like areas, like in the general vicinity of a couple different areas up there, and those were the areas that I wanted to hunt. And I was conscious of not blowing them out and having the right access and waiting for the right perfect conditions, and I just didn't get the right conditions often enough. And so the bad part is that really kind of hamstrings me going into next year, because I probably could have learned a lot, even if I had bad access, about like this access sucks. Because I'm sitting here today going, I still don't know if the wind that I was waiting on and the conditions I was waiting on, if I get those, if I go to access that area, is the access actually going to be good or not? And I could have figured that out this past year and didn't. So that's bad. That's bad on me. So what was your learning from the bad part for next year that you think you'll apply and carry forward?
Well, just not to overextend myself. I mean, it's hard when you draw two primo tags or have the opportunity to draw two primo tags. It's hard not to do both of them. But you have to and I think this from the outside looking in, a lot of people think the guys like you, guys like me, like we just can go do whatever the hell we want and we have all the time in the world. And like, it's just, that's certainly not the case. So I think just being able to prioritize, the value of those tags within a normal hunting season and not like take away from your family and not take away too much from work. I think that's ultimately something. One of the three you're going to have to sacrifice one of the three, right? It's going to be hunting. It's going to be work. It's going to be family. Usually, hopefully it's work over the other two. And hopefully it's hunting over family, but just trying to have I don't know, just trying to balance that out, I think. And I don't think we ever fully figure that out, but yeah, just the life work hunt balance, because the fall of 2022, I regret some of it.
Right. Yeah. I think for me, the learning, I already kind of mentioned it, but I'll just reiterate it, is I need to stay more Johnny on the spot with the dynamics of the food sources, not just like how they rotate during the course of the year, but having like a plan B, C, and D for whenever, I don't get the crop that I was kind of expecting or whatever. Cause that really threw me for a loop this year. It didn't frustrate me so much. I wasn't mad about it necessarily. Cause like, what are you going to do? Like, it is what it is, But it's funny because a lot of other guys I've talked to kind of had a similar thing where they're like, man, I don't have acorns. Like, I don't know where they're at. Like, I had a pile of them last year. Like, this year's just bad for them. And I don't know if it was like the drought, that we had last year, the really kind of hot weather and dry weather we had like part of last summer that really kind of killed it, or if it was an early frost or what. So I probably need to pay closer attention to that weather thing at the beginning, part of the spring, and then at the end of summer to kind of maybe have a better idea of like what I might get, so I can have a better plan. But yeah, for me, I think it's just planning better around the food sources.
When you were using your cameras on that northern piece, I have to think that like the majority of them were probably around those food sources. Would that be an accurate guess, or were they kind of a wider net?
So it's a little bit of both, because like a lot of times where I'm getting those deer, especially earlier in the year in the summer, when I'm getting inventory, it's a lot of times in like these like wild blueberry patches, to be honest. Like that's a lot of times where you'll really find them. The food up there is few and far between. I don't find a lot of oak trees up there, put it that way. And even some of the guys I talk to, like locals and stuff like that, like they don't find a ton of them either. And so really the cameras really are more of like a casting of a wide net, trying to find like little pinches and stuff that they're going to want to move through. There's not, and you saw some of it too. It's like a lot of it is open. And so it's really just kind of finding like, where's the thickest, like kind of bedding area opportunities that they would spend time in and feel like they're secluded. That's really where we've been having the most success in getting inventory and finding deer. And so my strategy this year is changing a little bit to where I'm going to focus on a little bit of a different area because it has a lot more of that. And this past year, we ran a few more cameras in that general area, and we had more, I guess, big deer, if you will, like in that area, as opposed to where we've been traditionally kind of running trail cameras.
Do you think the change in that pattern was solely focused on food, or do you think some of that had to do with like possible pressure? Because I'm just thinking from a couple different perspectives. If the food is constantly changing, if you've said you've kind of found these security cover areas, but if pressure changes those two, ultimately that's going to change the deer behavior as well. So trying to find that constant between the food or the cover. Just curious on your take on that.
Yeah, I don't worry too much about the pressure up there. I mean, it gets hot and heavy like when gun season and bear season comes in and stuff like that. But during archery season, you don't see very many people, just in general. And it's so vast too. Now, the one area that I want to focus on a little bit more this year, it certainly has better access or easier access, which is why I've historically, like the past 2 years, I've had a couple cameras there. but I've kind of stayed away from it in general because I just thought it was going to get pounded. I was like, this is the easiest place to get into. Like, why wouldn't people just flock to this, But on our cameras, like, we're not seeing people at all, really. I think last year, maybe we saw 2, like, and that was just during gun season. This past year, we haven't had any. And the deer there's big deer there. They actually seem to move more in daylight than in the other area. And so I'm a little baffled by it because I thought for sure that would be the spot that had the most pressure, But just by and large, I don't worry too much about the pressure there. I really think that how they move and how they kind of change throughout the year is solely kind of based on food. But I just haven't quite dialed in like what the right food sources are there, because they're not like they're not classic kind of food sources that you would think of, like, necessarily. Like, there's things there that deer are eating that I'm just not familiar with, like beech nuts, shit like that. Like, I never would have thought of that. And I was talking to a local, because they're like all spiny and like all sharp. And I saw like a bunch of hauls from them, like the one last year when I was scouting. I was talking to a guy that lives up there, and I was like, I found a bunch of hauls of these, and like, it looks like something's eating them. And he's like, yeah. He's like, man, deer eat the shit out of those. He's like, especially like late fall, early winter. And I'm like, oh, well, damn, there you go. You know what I mean? I was like, I never saw that as a food source. I'm always looking for oaks, just not finding those. And so I'm having to kind of recalibrate a little bit of like what food looks like up there, to a degree. I mean, oaks still are like the king, right? If you can find those, but they're just, and not even just white oaks, red oaks, because white oaks aren't super prevalent in a lot of areas up there. Like, I just don't run across a lot of white oaks. I will find some red oaks. And so all of a sudden now, typically you wouldn't think about red oaks until later in the season, maybe even after gun season or whatever, where those are actually up there. Those are in play, like during the fall, because, you have to just remember, it's like there's not really any ag around. They're mountain deer. Like, so they're eating whatever's around. Ferns, Johnny Stewart, I'm going to throw a shout out for Johnny, him and his ferns. You know what I mean? Like, we have videos of them eating fern, like it's, I know we know that they do that, but like, it's just a general food source that they have up there, because they don't have like the prime food sources in that area, so yep. It's kind of almost like you almost have to go to like your secondary like food source list to start with. And that's really what you're starting with there.
Bro, it's going into a hunt with it playing out a certain way. Like, that's what, like I talked about that. You've talked about it, and like approaching that thinking like, okay, I'm going to go in and find these oak stands or hunt big deer on these oak stands. Like, when it doesn't happen, like it throws you for a loop.
Yeah. And it's just also understanding that like you can't hunt them in this area very well. In certain setups you could, but some of the places that we've been, that area that we scouted together, that mountainside or whatever, like you can't really hunt them in their beds on the tops. Like, you'll never get in. There's just no way that you're going to get in quiet enough to get close enough to have a chance. And so that's what makes it so hard, is because they have so many ways to get out, because there's not a lot of terrain funneling them, but it's so hard because it's so steep and so hard to get into and so noisy that you can't really hunt 60 yards off their bed. And even if you could, you don't really know what direction they're going to leave, because they could go any direction, because there's no terrain really pushing them anywhere. And so what I've started kind of seeing is more like maybe halfway up the mountain, like where you start getting these benches that kind of start to pop out and stuff like that. Like, that's what I've actually seen, where we've actually seen like a fair amount of daylight movement. In and around like drainages that have like a little bit of water and stuff like that. That's the other thing, like where we've had cameras, like where we've seen some of that, like at the heads of drainages and stuff like that. That's something I actually picked up from Paul Patera. Like, he kind of turned me onto that, and it's kind of played out. So yeah, I mean, there's certain swampy areas and stuff like that, and it's just some of the areas up there, it's just the access is hard, and some of it's just so far back that it's like you can't get back there. You have to kind of hunt the fringe, and so some of those areas I've just almost like cut off and be like, all right, that one's just not even worth it. Like, it's 3.5 miles to get to like where I want to get to. Like, I'm never going to get there. I would need a spike camp to make that happen, essentially.
Right.
But
right.
Cool, man. So let's move on to the ugly, dude. What was the ugly for you this year?
Oh, just not filling the Iowa tag, obviously.
Yeah.
And then not being able to go back. I mean, I know that was the bad, but in reality, that was
the ugly. Was like not being able to go back in January.
Yeah, there were two primo. So, let me back up a little bit. In Iowa, you can hunt in the late muzzleloader with a bow with a bow tag. And there were two primo cold fronts that rolled in during that time frame. Like one was like 2 days before Christmas, and like I'm not going to go hunt during like Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, but not missing those cold fronts with that tag in my pocket, dude. That was a hard pill. That was a hard pill to swallow. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I was texting you. I remember during those, like, hey,
everybody was. Everybody said crazy, but it is. I mean, there'll be other Iowa tags. You know.
Yeah.
There'll be other Iowa tags.
Exactly.
What about you? What was the ugly for you?
The ugly for me, man, was I think the worst one, well, two of them, I guess, was getting drawn on that one deer in Kansas and just not being able to get the arrow off and blowing that hunt. Because that was one of those things where it's like, it was after I found that big deer, and I was like, all right, I'm going to change my game plan. I'm going to go to this other draw that I really wanted to check out. The wind wasn't right, and so I was like, well, I can't get to where I want to get to, so I'm going to set up here. It's kind of as an observation, see if he might use that draw too. I was like, but see if deer are using this draw. And then, but I kind of set up in a spot to where I could see where I wanted to hunt, really, but I wasn't going to be able to hunt it. And then at the same time, I was like, okay, this is kind of like an okay spot. Maybe this comes to fruition. Maybe a deer does, what I think it might do and come around the edge of these cedars. And if so, that'd be awesome. And I'll be, kind of primed for the spot, or primed for the shot. And just second guessing myself. Like when I set up there, I walked by the spot that I should have set up in, and I looked at it, and I was like, nah. I was like, I don't feel like I have enough back cover. And so I changed the spot that I wanted to be at to have some back cover, and I had great front cover because I had a bunch of locust small, like little locust saplings, which was also a great setup. But I would have changed my setup if I had just sat down where I was at and drawn to make sure that like I wasn't going to clip anything or anything like that, because that's what screwed me up. Was that deer came around, he was coming around the edge of these cedars. I knew when I had that set up that when I saw a buck, if a buck showed up, I was going to see him, and it was going to be like he was already in bow range. Like there wasn't really going to be a whole lot of time to make decisions or do whatever. Like when I saw his antlers, he was at 20 yards, like the first time I'd see him. And he came around, and if he made it jog to his left, that was going to be the hardest shot for me because I had to stand up and draw at the same time to shoot over top these cedar saplings. I was on this big embankment, and he was like, might have been like 8 foot down below me. And certainly that's what he did. Like, of course, because that's what I didn't want him to do, and he was at like 15 to 18 yards, whatever it happened to be. And this is the one, so there was two things that I did wrong here in hindsight. And it's why I don't get mad very often whenever a hunt blows up. The only time I actually get mad is like when I just do something so stupid that it's like my fault. Because a lot of times you can chalk that stuff up to like, oh man, it's bow hunting. Like that shit happens, Right. They wind you, like they get real close and they get spooky. Like that's bow hunting. You know what I mean? Like you didn't get a shot because there was a branch in the way. Like that's bow hunting. You know what I mean? Like that's just shit happens. But this one was, I picked the wrong spot and I knew better. My gut feeling was the right feeling because after the situation or the encounter went down and he ran off, I went over and sat in that spot and I was like, oh my God, I'm so hidden here. He would have never seen me. Like, and it would have been a chip shot at 12 yards. At that point he would have been completely broadside and had no clue I was there. I would have been able to draw from being seated. There was literally like a little spot in the grass that was open right in front of me where he would have been. I would have had to done nothing but draw and just let it fly. So the first mistake was not picking the right spot. The second one was not drawing whenever I finally got to the other spot. And the third one was whenever he came around these cedars, there's two rows of cedars beside each other, but really tight. And they kind of wrap around. And like I thought he was going to do what he was doing, which was going around, going to scent check and go around the other side of the cedars. But there was like a little gap to where he could almost get down in between the middle of them. And in my mind, whenever he turned that corner he made that left around, that he stuck his head in like the cedar, in between the cedar rows, and I thought he was going to go down the middle of it and I was going to lose the shot. In hindsight, after it all happened, I looked, I was like, dude, that's so thick, he's not walking through that. Like he's not going to move, he's not going to walk down because it's just like completely overgrown there. But in my mind, when it happened, I thought he was going to walk down that middle in between them and I was going to lose the opportunity. So that's why I kind of rushed the shot. if I would have waited, he was going to come around the other side. I was going to have now still a hard shot because it was going to be a fairly quartering away shot, but at least his head was going to be turned away from me. And I could stop him, and I still had the shot with nothing in front of me because now he was on my clean side where there was no breakup. I was going to have a complete open shot to him. It was going to be hard quartering away, but sticking in his last rib and it comes out his front shoulder, out his brisket. You know what I mean? And that would have still been at 20 yards max. Might even been closer. So it was screwing those couple things up was the ugly because that was like. I mean, you couldn't have drew it up any better. Like that was what you wanted a deer to do, and he did it, And then the last one was just, it was a good experience, but it was just getting hung out to dry on that big deer on the last day, having him at 25 yards and just not being able to get a shot because I didn't know exactly where the saplings were, and I was stuck out in the middle of no man's land, I don't know that I could have played it any better. It was ugly because, like, how do you have a deer that big, that close? Because, I mean, I was there with him for, like, probably easily 15 to 20 minutes. It might have been longer. You know what I mean? Like, that I was, like, within 20 to 30 yards of him, like, on the ground. Like, he was that close for that long, and I just could not, for the life of me, get him killed. Part of it was not enough light, so I was waiting to get enough light. And then part of it was that I didn't have anything between he and I. I was just in CRP and a ghillie jacket, and it finally at one point I was like, there was getting enough light to where I was going to be able to shoot soon, but I was like, he's going to see me because he was up like this little incline, and I could see him early because I was able to get his silhouette. But he couldn't see me because I was coming up out. You know exactly what draw I was coming out of. I was coming up out of that draw over towards his locust. So I had all the dark draw behind me, so there was no light behind me. So I could see him early, but just not enough light to shoot. And so at that point, as the light was starting to crack, I was like, I need to get behind something. There was like a Charlie Brown Christmas tree to my left, and I slid behind that. But he was so close, and he thought I was a buck. So he was snort wheezing and stuff at me, and like another buck that was like 40 yards to my right. That I started like grunting and like scooting my feet, trying to just sound like I didn't have 2 feet. I wanted to just sound like I had more than 2 feet. So I was just like scuffing my feet along to get over to that tree. And then I waited behind that tree for probably 5 minutes watching him. And I just needed him to come just close enough to where I knew he was in front of those saplings. Because I could now see him well enough, but I still couldn't make out exactly where like the saplings were at. And I knew that there were saplings in there from being up there the day before. And so I just wasn't confident in taking that shot. And I snort wheezed at him one last time, and he came to like 20, 25 yards, whatever it was at that point. And I didn't have a shot because it would have been front on. I still didn't know where the saplings were at, and then he just followed another doe away, and that was it. So that was the ugly just because it was just I spent that much time that close to that caliber of animal and just could not figure out how to get him killed. But I don't know that I could have done anything different or better,
Yeah, that's one of the things, man, it could be so frustrating, and you play those scenarios back in your mind, and it's like you did everything right to get to that point. So what could you actually do different? I mean, sometimes you make all the right calls and make all the right decisions and make all the right actions, and like it still doesn't work out. And like to your point, those things, that's bow hunting.
Yeah. Yeah, that one you can chalk up to bow hunting because it's just like, I don't think I made any mistakes. He didn't know I was there. He didn't smell me. He didn't see me. He didn't, like, hear me. I mean, he heard me coming up out of the draw, but he thought I was a buck.
Right.
Because he was fired up, dude, snort wheezing at me and shit. Like, he was carrying on. But it's ugly because, like, how do you spend 20 minutes within, like, 20 to 30 yards of a 150 to 160 inch deer and not get him killed? You know what I mean? Like, yeah. Where he's exactly where you thought he was going to be. Like he was literally the tree I wanted to get under. He was standing right behind it when I got there. Like he beat me there. You know what I mean? It's like, and how, like in a million years, if I put money on it, I would have never guessed that I'm going to show up to the tree I want to hunt and that deer's going to be standing right beside it. Yeah. Like how often does that happen? You know what I mean?
Never.
Like, never, But it was one of those things where it's like I beat him. Like I knew exactly where he was going to be. You know what I mean? Like I knew what he was going to do. It was the right spot, the right time. Just that's bow hunting. So I now got it stuck in my craw where it's like I got to go. Like I'm determined to kill one in that area off the ground. Like it's got to happen.
You will.
So that's the good and bad and the ugly for us, man. What do you have for loose plans for next year, dude?
I have another Idaho tag, another primo Idaho tag. So
Nice.
my September, man, I'm so bitten by the elk bug. Like I know it's like a running joke inside of our circle that like I'm going to give up hunting whitetails for elk hunting, which that's not the case. But as long as I have access to a good unit, like I would hope that I can elk hunt for as long as I can. So I was lucky enough to end up with another very good Idaho tag. Very good. It's the same unit I hunted last year, actually. So I'll be spending September there. And the whitetail stuff's still kind of up in the air. I know that we bounced the idea of going to Missouri just a couple of days ago. We had talked about that.
Yep.
I can draw Kansas again if I want to do that. Again, going back to the time thing, does that make sense? And then also in the back of my mind, it's like, man, I live in Ohio, and like I didn't even bow hunt Ohio this year.
Right.
The year before that, I mean, I haven't killed a deer. I haven't killed a buck. I shouldn't say deer. I haven't killed a buck in Ohio in a number of years, and I might just take a look at that. I don't know. Yeah, but loosely Idaho for sure. The whitetail stuff is it's still kind of up in the air.
Right. Yeah.
Some of that's dependent on you too.
Yeah, dependent on me, is it? All right.
Maybe.
All right. So I'm not headed west this year. For no other reason than I'm an idiot. We'll just chalk that up to that, you know. But partially it was somewhat planned because I know we have like hunt plans that we're working and stuff like that, and I know that those should start to kick in here in the not so distant future. And so I'm like, you know, let me hunt some whitetails. I know I have a whole western slew of stuff that's going to happen here in the next 2 to 3 years. That it's going to be every year after that, you know, for the foreseeable future. If I want it to be, based on the points and stuff that I'll have. And so, no Western trip this year. Missouri's what's really kind of on my radar right now, just because like there's a really great spot that we were able to hunt the last time we were out there. I've talked to a couple buddies that are out from that general area and corroborate that is a primo location. So we definitely would like to get back there. I also feel like that's one of those places where, don't want to sound cocky or anything, but like just based on what we saw while we were there, I feel like that's a place you can go. And if you don't have standards of like 150 inches or better, I feel like you can go there and get it done in like 3 days. And that's not unreasonable. You know what I mean? Like I think you could literally do that.
We did that. I mean, we essentially did that in 2 days. I mean,
yeah, not even 2 days. It was less than 36 hours.
Is that what it was? I know it wasn't long.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because I mean, we got there the one evening, scouted. You missed a decent buck. You saw a giant.
Saw a giant.
I saw it.
Missed
I saw it.
buck.
Yeah, I saw a giant. And then the next day, I think you saw that 130-inch deer again. And then I shot one, and we never found it by like 7:30 that morning.
Yeah.
You know, and we didn't start hunting until the day prior around like 2:00 or something like that.
Yep.
You know, so it wasn't even shit. I mean, it wasn't even 24 hours until I was like done from the time we got there till the time I let an arrow go, you know? So that being said, it's like, I'd really like to get back to that spot. Some of it's a little bit contingent on what you're planning to do. I don't have a Kansas point this year, so yeah, I could try to get a Kansas tag, but there's obviously no guarantee that I would get one. If I could get one, I would go back, but you know, I'm just not sure that'll happen. And I know if you put in to get it, you will get one. So if you get one and I don't, then we're not hunting together again this year. And then maybe Ohio. So it's one of those things where it's like if you're pressed for time, you know, nice thing is that Missouri tag's over the counter, so it's like I don't need to get it until kind of like the last minute. So it's like if you're pressed for time and we're really not going to travel, and you're like, hey, I'm going to do some Ohio stuff, it's like then I can just zip down to Ohio and we can hang out, you know, and take a beating in Ohio together again.
Yeah. Missouri being over the counter is kind of clutch because like I guess you could say I have commitment issues, but just knowing the Idaho thing, like the Idaho thing could be a week or it could be 3 weeks. I mean,
yeah, I like the Missouri thing a lot just because, like I said, I think it's a place you could get it done quickly, and I would not be afraid then to because I'm not going out west, I'm basically just going to take 2 weeks off, and some of that I might hunt in the North Piece in PA. Some of it might be Missouri. If I started out in Missouri, if you fill a tag in the first couple of days, it's like I would have no problem zipping to like Ohio, picking up a tag, and just hunting for however much time I have left and doing that too.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about the Missouri trip is like you said, we already have a baseline. Like going back, was that 3 years ago we went there? I think that was 3.
Yeah.
That would have been 2019-ish, something like that. If you remember, we spent the majority of that trip bouncing around to half the damn state, it seemed like, just trying to get away from people or trying to find a piece that we felt like we could have success on. So I think, eroding that into, taking that out of the equation and having a full 5 days or 7 days on a piece that has higher odds, like that's most of the work right there.
Yeah. I mean, we go back with a bunch of info, so that's nice. Well, cool, man. That's it, buddy. That's our good, bad, and the ugly post-mortem 2022 season, and now we're ready to get started on the 23 season, man. I hope we get to hunt together this year, dude.
I do too. Yep.
Yeah, it'll be good. The rut wagon's ready.
If we do any turkey hunting, you guys are coming to Ohio this time.
Okay. That's fair. That last year was brutal, man. I about lost an eye. Hepler taking us through some shitty swamps, like that guy. So let's do that. Let's make a plan. I'll come out to Ohio. We'll do some turkey hunting in Ohio. I'll bring the old rut wagon. We got a shitter in the rut wagon now, dude. You haven't even seen that. Like
we're high class now.
We're high class now. I just got a net for underneath the bunk to stow some stuff in. It's next level now, dude. It's like probably don't even need a house anymore.
I'm not sure your wife would like that.
No, probably not. Well, she might actually. Well, if I left and just lived in that and she stayed at the house, I think she'd be quite okay with it. But yeah, that's true. Before I let you get out of here, buddy, why don't you let everyone know where they can find out all about Exodus, what you guys got going on? You guys put out a bunch of killer content, so let them know where they can find that.
Yeah, Exodus Outdoor Gear. Any social channel, just Google it. You'll find us. Website, podcasts, YouTube channel, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, all the same.
Yep. And be sure to sign up for their newsletter. That's the place where you get all the straight dope for any of the new.
Yeah, any of the new products. When is this going live, Clint?
This will be like first week of March, probably. First week of March.
Can I mention the bow giveaway and stuff that we're doing right now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So right now, if you go to the Exodus website and just use a search tab, search Prime giveaway, Prime Exodus giveaway, we're giving away a new Prime Revix, a dozen MMT arrows, and a SP18 Exodus Rival cell cam package. So it's like $2,000, like $1,800. All you gotta do is sign up, enter your email, get you a chance to win.
Sounds like a pretty easy peasy way to try to win some dope stuff. So everyone go sign up for that. Try to win some dope stuff. Chad, thanks, brother. I appreciate you, man. And I look forward to seeing you again soon. Let's get a turkey hunt in the books.
Yes, sir.